afternoon, everyone. You have made it. This is the final lesson, all about how electricity works and all the technicalities of those things. But to explain the final bit, which is all about watts, we're gonna have to pick up a few props. So let's go. Hello everyone and welcome to Kingsland Park. This is essentially abandoned. There's pretty much no one here except me and the ducks, so that's great. Anyway, so today we're again by water, and there's a very specific reason for that. Today we're going to be talking all about watts. Now, you might be wondering what happened to that little excursion earlier. We went to Quick Check and got Reese's Cups. First of all, Reese's Cups are delicious, number one. Number two, there's actually a very specific purpose for that, and so which we will see soon. But before we do that, we have to define a few things, and the first of them being different units of energy. So first of all, what is energy? So now you've seen many different types of energy. There is chemical energy, there is electrical energy, there is all kinds of different things. There are different units, there are different words that we use for a measure of that energy. We talk about volts, which are a measure of how fast electricity is moving. We talk about amps, we talk about that's how much electricity is flowing. For example, a common unit of energy is called the joule, not the diamond kind, is the Joule, which is, again, someone's last name, but not really relevant for right now. Point being is that that's a unit of energy. 1 joule is a certain amount of energy. There's also a calorie, or a kilocalorie, which is 1,000 small calories, which is actually the measurement we use for food. If you have a Reese's bars, we're going to just take a look how many calories this has. It's 220. This has 220 calories in it, which means there's chemical energy contained in this bar that contains 220 calories, which, as we just discussed, is actually 220,000 calories in the small calories, right? These are actually kilocalories, but we just shortened it to make it better. In fact, you'll actually notice it's calories with a capital C, which means this is the big kind of calories, not the small kind. So a calorie is a unit of energy. Another unit we have fairly often we use is milliamp hours. We have a little power bank right here. This is a 2,000 milliamp hour power bank. That's how much energy it can hold. That's not a measure of power, it's a measure of energy. Separate thing, right? Similar batteries are the same way. This is just another battery. This is rechargeable, and that's why it's relevant. So you would have this, you say, how many times can this charge my phone? My phone needs 1,000 milliamp hours my phone's battery is 1,000 milliamp hour phone battery. And so, well, that can hold, so this can recharge your phone twice. Now I made up those numbers. This is a 2,000 milliamp hour power bank. I made up the numbers with phones. Each phone is different. Check it. But if they come out with a new phone, they say, hey, this phone has a 40,000 milliamp hour battery. It would be ginormous. But that means it has a lot of can store a lot of energy, right? Those are different examples of energy. So now we know what energy, and now we know the words for energy. There's calories, there's joules, there's milliamp hours. Now we know what energy is, but now energy is not useful by itself. Energy is only relevant when it's doing something, and for that we have to think about another factor, and that is time. So there comes another thing as a measure of power, and power is measured relative to time. So one very common way we discuss power is in regard to cars. So let's head over there and we're gonna talk about it. All right, so here we have it. We have a car. In fact, this is my car. This is a 2010 Subaru Outback, and I checked up the specs. In 2010, when it was brand new, it had between 170 and 256 horsepower. Now, horsepower is a very old measurement, and it went back to the day when this was not powered by an engine. In fact, it was powered by a horse. And they started making the conversion from horse carriages to horseless carriages, was what they first called cars. So they needed some way of comparing the power that they used to have to the power that they have now in their new horseless carriages. And so what they did is they compared it to a horse, and the new word was born. It's called horsepower. Interestingly, though, the amount of power in 1 horsepower is kind of a random number. I'll tell you what it is. It's 745.7 watts is 1 horsepower. And it's a little bit of a weird number. I'll tell you the weirdest part about it is that a horse can make more than 1 horsepower. 1 second there. It's called horsepower. One would think it's comparable to the power of a horse. Wrong. A horse can produce about 14.9 horsepower. So where did that number come from? If I find out, maybe I'll film another bit and I'll tell you, but it's kind of strange. It's kind of strange anyway, even if there is an explanation for it. I'm sure there is. Anyway, point being, horsepower is a unit of power. It's a unit of how fast this engine can make this car go. Back in the day, this could make between 100, let's call it 200 horsepower. That's quite a powerful engine. Now it's been 10 years. Now we're considering naming it. If you guys have any ideas for what we should name this car, let me know, because this has taken me through thick and thin. This went to Washington, D.C. and Niagara Falls in the middle of the winter and all kinds of crazy places. This is driven way past when it was supposed to die, and so I think we should name it. I think it's time. So if you guys have ideas for what we should name the car, let me know. Anyway, point being is that is a measure of power, meaning that is a measure of what this thing can actually do. So to tell more about what power means and what watts are, let's head back over to my spot in the park and we'll talk about that there. Here we go. So that brings us to what we're talking about today, and today is all about watts. And so watts is a unit of power. Power is measured, let's give you a good example of this. Imagine for a moment, I wanted to walk from here to the North Pole. I can do it. It's land all the way through. Technically, it falls off to ice at some point, but it's not technically land. But, point being, you can walk from here to the North Pole on foot. It would take an extremely long time, though, and that would be a problem. So I have the energy potential to do that, assuming I have more food than I'm currently carrying on me. The only thing I have is the Reese's Cups from earlier. I would be dead long before I got there. But let's say I had more food. The food would give me more energy, and I would be able to keep going until I reached the North Pole. But it would take months, if not years, for me to walk there with my feet. See, energy is wonderful, but energy is not necessarily useful. When we talk about use of energy, that's what gets into power. If you imagine talking about a powerful king or a powerful dictator these days, or a president, someone who can do something. If you can't do something, you're not powerful. You can have lots of money, which would be our parallel to electricity in this case, but you can't use it if, let's say, you're in jail or Congress says none for you and you can't do anything about it. So that takes away your power. So in this case, though, we're talking about electrical power, and that is in terms of watts. Now, electrical power is referring to what can you do with this electricity. And the great example is if imagine you're trying to power a water wheel with a stream. So you have two options of getting power from that stream. The stream can be extremely fast, even if it's narrow and there isn't very much water going through it. But if it's pounding through extremely quickly, you still have enough power to power your sawmill or your grindstone thingy. Good for you. Or the other option, if it's very wide and there's a lot of water, even if it's not moving particularly quickly, you could still have enough power for your mill. So we're gonna head off to a short clip that I did with me and a hose, and we'll have fun with that, so let's go. All right, everyone, so we discussed voltage, high voltage, low voltage, all those things. So right now I've got a hose. So if we turn this hose to the strongest setting of this nozzle that it can go, you're gonna get a very high voltage at a very low current, which means that because there's a very little bit coming out at one time, but it's coming out very quickly. right? There you go. So high voltage, no current. So, but if we open this up, here we go. That's the other way. If we open this up to here, that's comparatively low voltage, but with a much higher current, because there's much more water coming out, but it's coming out at a slower speed. So both of those could equal to the same amount of watts. Got it? So anyway, so that just demonstrated for us in a visual sense the two options that you can have to get power. And those options essentially are voltage, which is speed, or ampage, which is the current, which is how much is going at one time. So you can have a little bit going very quickly, gets you a certain amount of watts. You can have a lot going slower, also gets you the same number of watts. Now obviously if it's both fast and a lot, you're gonna have a higher wattage than if it's slow and a little. See, there you go, and that's how you get watts. In fact, there is a mathematical equation to get this. It's very simple. You take your amps, you take your volts, you multiply them by each other, and the result is your watts. Now, if you have a voltmeter and if you have an amp meter, none of you have both. But here's what you can actually do to solve this problem. Pair up with someone who has the other thing. Let's say you have an amp meter. Call up someone who has a voltmeter and compare notes. So you're all running the same system. You're all running AA batteries with same light bulb, same wires, same everything, which therefore means you can get on the phone and say, I have a voltmeter, I'm reading however many volts. I have an amp meter, I'm reading however many amps. Take that, multiply them by each other, and you'll have your watts. Now you probably won't have a very high wattage just because it's a very tiny system. So don't expect massive results, but that's fine. That's your number one thing to do tonight. Do the equation and find out how many watts you are using with your light bulb. That's number one. Speaking of light bulbs, that brings us to, in fact, the very practical and very real usage of this information in real life. See, when you go to buy appliances or light bulbs or practically anything that uses electricity, it is rated at a certain number of watts per hour, per second. Some of them give you the estimated cost per year. In the case of, I think, air conditioners give you the estimated cost of it per year. But generally speaking, they tell you how many watts it burns. So in the case of this light bulb right here, this light bulb is an 8.8 watt light bulb, which means that you plug it in, 1 second, 8.8 watts, and so on. You multiply that 1 second by a minute, 60 times 8.8, so that, and then you multiply that by another 60, it's 3,600 times 8.8 is 31,680 something. That's not the point. Being is that this is an 8.8 watt light bulb. Now, if you had a 10 watt light bulb, it would burn more power in the same amount of time. If you had a 20, 30, 40, 50, etc., whatever it is, that's how many watts you're burning in your time. And so this is very relevant for a very specific purpose. You have to pay for electricity. It's not free, right? If you're using batteries, which you shouldn't if you're using for like day-to-day stuff, you have to replace those batteries. If you're plugging things into the wall, at the end of the month, your parents have to pay the power company. Every month I get a bill from PSE&G for my usage of electricity that month. And in fact, they don't measure things in watts because a watt, as we've discussed, is tiny. A watt, in fact, this is 8 watts just turned this thing on, and we have many of these throughout the house. And then we have computer chargers and computers plugged into the wall, and we have washing machines and dryers and all those things running, and those all take a ton of power, specifically the washer and dryer and the heating. Okay, appliances in general use a lot of power. So in fact, they use kilowatts. A kilowatt is 1,000 watts. It's a lot of power. And we get a bill at the end of the month. And so if you know how many watts you're burning, you can then save yourself a lot of money by buying equipment and appliances that uses less power, and that'll be shown in less watts. So now when it comes to light bulbs in particular, because this is the most common thing, easiest way to save yourself money is simply turn off the lights. It's good for the planet also because the power company would then have to burn less coal to make your electricity. But let's talk about you and your wallet. This is the whole COVID-19 downturn of, save yourself money, why not? So if you have this kind of light bulb. You have a light bulb that burns 8.8 and there's one that burns 4. You say, what? Well, you say, hold on, why would I buy one that burns 8 watts? Let's buy one that burns 4 watts. But there is a catch. As you go lower, you're also, generally speaking, producing less light. So sometimes that's okay, sometimes that's fine. Sometimes you don't want industrial power lights on your dining room table. You might want something softer and less bright, which is fine. But just keep that in mind when you're buying. Sometimes, so when you're buying, you have different options of how bright and how many watts. I said that on purpose. How bright and how many watts, because they're not necessarily the same thing. You can have a bulb this bulb is 800 lumens, and that's a certain amount of brightness. There's other bulbs that are 900, 1000 lumens, more or less, whatever it is. There's ones that are 40 lumens, which is very small. The ones that we have at home, I don't remember off the top of my head. I'm gonna look it up and put that number right there, how many lumens we have in our tiny light bulbs when they're on full power. It's not a lot. But the point being is like this. When you go to the store, you go to Home Depot, there's tons of very long lines right now, but if you were to go to Home Depot and you were to get in and you were to go to the light bulb section, you would notice that along the wall there's be a whole bunch of light bulbs that all burn at 800 lumens, but they're all gonna have different wattages. And that's because they have a different level of what we call efficiency. See, in every electrical circuit and every light fixture, there is a certain amount of waste. And the waste that happens is through heat. Older light bulbs were very, very inefficient because they wasted a ton of heat. They would spend a ton of their electricity making heat and not making light. They would also make some light, which is why people bought them and why people use them, but they also got extremely hot. You might be, let's say if you go to your grandparents' house when all this is over, they might have light bulbs that if you touch them, you can burn yourself on them. Be careful if they have older light fixtures. In fact, even going further back, there were some that got so hot that they would cause things in the house to catch fire, and it would be extremely dangerous. Now, these days, there have been regulations made that light bulbs cannot get to the point where they're going to set things on fire, but they can still get very hot. Well, even this one, this is a very efficient light bulb, but this still gets hot. And so when you make heat as well as light, you're wasting electricity on light. So this makes 800 lumens, but let's say this raises the temperature of the room by 3 degrees. That's a waste, right? It wastes heat. So it spends a whole bunch, spends some of the power, let's say it spends 7 watts making light, but then it spends 1 watt making heat. Now if you're gonna get the super duper expensive one, it would burn at 800 lumens for 6 watts. How does it do that? I'll tell you. Because it managed somehow to waste less heat. And so it managed, therefore, to have a process. They managed, and the engineers figured out a process making a light bulb that burns at 800 lumens and makes a lot of light, but makes almost no heat. And they could therefore make it more efficient. So, one last thing, and this is something I do every time we talk about someone's name. The watt is in fact named after someone. It's named after James Watt. There's several reasons why we're not getting into him. Number 1, his name is James, so whatever. Number 2, he's not really relevant. That's the main reason. The main reason is because he's not relevant to what we're talking about. He in fact was not a scientist in regards to electricity. He was an engineer. He came up with a vast improvement on the way of some kind of steam pump. So you're more than welcome to do your research and figure out who James Watt is and why we honor him by naming the Watt after him. The other guy that we didn't really speak about is James Prescott Joule, one who was named for what the Joule was named after. And the reason why we didn't, because the focus of this lesson was on Watt, and we're not talking about James Watt either. So, okay. You're welcome to do your own research. I'm gonna put the names and pictures here. James Prescott Joule, and wait for it, James Watt. What? What? Okay, I had to do that once. All right. A couple things for homework tonight. Please send me, number 1, please send me your notes of what we just talked about, of what a watt is, the various measurements of energy and power, and also please send me the measurement of your light bulbs of how many watts these guys burn per second. Well, that is, a watt is a measurement of a second, so there you have it.